Minister and founder of Something or Other Publishing, Wade Fransson, is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Joining him is Daniel Sanderson, CEO of Planksift, an international philosophy and cultural media outlet, helping emerging thought leaders with personal branding by co-creating organic content. Tonight's episode, Archaeology and the Independent Investigation of the Truth.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Created in the Image of God. I'm your host, Wade Fransson. Tonight, we have a very special show, one that I've been looking forward to for some time. Many of you know that I have a lifelong passion, some might say obsession, with the Holy Scriptures, with the revealed Word of God, as found primarily in the Scriptures of the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, the 66 books of the Bible. In recent years, I've discovered that there are other texts of equal value, and my search has continued over the years, a quest for the independent understanding and investigation of the truth, as guided by what I believe to be a higher power. Tonight's episode coincides with a twin celebration in the Holy Land, the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel celebrated its Memorial Day, and as we have now sunset, the Hebrew day goes from the evening to the morning, as it says in the book of Genesis, and the evening and the morning were the first day, and the evening and the morning were the second day. Well, in Israel, they've got a twin celebration, Memorial Day and Independence Day. And coincidentally, I met a tour guide when I was in Israel in January by the name of Allan Rabinowitz. And Allan and I have been trying to coordinate his appearance on this show ever since we coincidentally met at the City of David Archaeological Expedition site, which you'll hear more about in the upcoming interview. As it turned out, we scheduled the show for tonight without me having any idea that it coincided with these twin celebrations. So in honor of the Memorial Day, which celebrates the fallen in battle, and in 97, I believe it was, they expanded that to include those who have fallen victim through other strife, through other contention in the state of Israel, other victims. In honor of them, we're going to show you a brief little video that honors and celebrates these twin days. This was prepared originally for the 60th anniversary. Today we have the 75th anniversary of the memorial and the independence, the declaration of the state of Israel. So we'll go ahead and watch that video, and then I'll come back and tell you a little bit more about tonight's program.
It was the most haunting of all prophetic visions. The prophet Ezekiel saw a valley of dry bones, a heap of skeletons. God asked him, "Son of man, can these bones live?" Ezekiel replied, "God, you alone know." Then the bones came together and grew flesh and skin and began to breathe and live again. Then God said, "Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say our bones are dried up. Of that tikvatenu, our hope is lost. Therefore prophesy and say to them, this is what God says. My people, I am going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel." It was this passage that Naftali Herz Imber was alluding to in 1877, when he wrote in the song that became Israel's national anthem, Hatikva, the phrase, Od lo, of da tikvatenu, our hope is not yet lost. Little could he have known that 70 years later, 1/3 of the Jewish people would have become, in Auschwitz and Treblinka and Bergen-Belsen, a valley of dry bones. Who could have been blamed for saying, our bones are dried up, our hope is lost? And yet, A mere 3 years after standing eyeball to eyeball with the angel of death, the Jewish people, by proclaiming the State of Israel, made a momentous affirmation of life, as if it had heard across the centuries the echo of God's words to Ezekiel, "Veheveti etchem el admat Yisrael." I will bring you back to the land of Israel. And a day will one day come when the story of Israel in modern times will speak not just to Jews, but to all who believe in the power of the human spirit as it reaches out to God, as an everlasting symbol of the victory of life over death, hope over despair. Israel has taken a barren land and made it bloom again. It's taken an ancient language, the Hebrew of the Bible, and made it speak again. It's taken the West's oldest faith and made it young again. It's taken a tattered, shattered nation and made it live again. Israel is the country whose national anthem, Hatikva, means hope. Israel is the home of hope.
Quite a memorable, striking little presentation. I'd like to add a couple of personal reflections. One is that I actually, at one point in my life, moved to Germany. I spent 10 years there. While there, I had the opportunity to visit Dachau a number of times, which is one of those concentration camps. I got to experience firsthand the Vergangenheitsbewältigung, the efforts to deal with the past that the German people had in the wake of their involvement in the events that we've just seen reflected in that little video. I'm also have been aware for many decades, partly because of my undergraduate degree in theology, the unit that I did on biblical archaeology, and the time I spent at the City of David Archaeological Expedition and subsequent trips to Israel, that they have in fact resurrected the language. That Hebrew was basically a dead language, not spoken. And the Jews had been scattered in the, over the centuries around the world, and a concerted effort was made to resurrect that language by the Jewish people in the Holy Land. Those are just a few of the highlights that lie behind the reality, the powerful reality of that little video. So I could go on and say much more, but I have had the opportunity to do a pre-recorded interview with Allan Rabinowitz, as I mentioned, an Israeli tour guide that I encountered at the City of David Archaeological Park when I was there in January with my family. And when we connected and I shared with him that I'd been there, his brother-in-law had been on the dig the same time that I was many, many years ago. And we had this instant connection, and we've since been trying to coordinate this. So we were able to pre-record it. Of course, Israel's in a different time zone. He had to get up very early in the morning to get on to go on a trip with regard to the celebration of Independence Day. So we pre-recorded the interview during the daylight portion of Israel's Memorial Day, and now we're airing it at the beginning, or actually, the beginning part of the actual Day of Independence. So I'll just go ahead now and share that video. We'll have a few breaks for commercials throughout, but I want to encourage those of you in the audience to post your comments, to share, to like, to invite others. And we will be, again, giving away a copy of a book, in this case, my book, The People of the Sign, to the person with the most interesting comment for tonight. So please do engage, even though this is a pre-recorded show, and we will also be engaging with your comments as we go through tonight's presentation. So sit back and enjoy, which is what I'll be doing as well. Allan, welcome to the Created in the Image of God show. We've been working on pulling this off for some time, and coincidentally, here we are meeting on the 75th anniversary of Independence Day in Israel.
Well, it's actually still Memorial Day. We juxtapose together Memorial Day, which is very sad and somber, from evening to evening. And this evening, it will transition from sadness to ecstatic joy.
Well, that's interesting. So unpack that a little bit for me and our audience. I hadn't realized that distinction. So a
Yeah.
moment on the difference between memorial and independence.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'll say just very briefly that the reason we do the holidays and the festivals, even secular festivals, from evening to evening is basically because of the religion, in which in the Jewish religion, the festivals go from evening to evening, and that is traced right back to Genesis. And there was evening and there was morning, the first day, and so forth, including the Sabbath. So the Sabbath goes from evening to evening, and all Jewish holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Passover, they all start in the evening, and that has passed over to other holidays such as Independence Day and Memorial Day, or I should put it the other way around, Memorial Day and Independence Day. And what that does, the evening entry into a holiday in general, not just for these 2 days, but in general, it allows you to move into the mood of the day when you're fully awake. It's not like you go to bed at night, you wake up in the morning and it's a special day. You move into that transition in full awareness, such as from the secular to the holy day of Sabbath. You move from that secular feeling to that holy feeling with a ceremonial transition. And in a sense, the same is true here, where Memorial Day is really Memorial Day. I know that it is for many people in the United States, but also for many people, it's a vacation day. It's a day for sales, whereas here, things are subdued. Cafes and restaurants are closed. The military cemeteries, unfortunately, are full. We went to a play last night, which was based on some terrible terrorist attacks that had taken place. So it is extremely somber. Sirens sound in the evening and in the morning, and the whole country stops during the time of those sirens. And then there is this very powerful transition when it's time to say goodbye to that, and it's time to move into full celebration. And it's like jumping into a fresh spring or something, from one to the other. It's a very deep feeling to move from one to the other, and juxtaposing the different sides of life, which of course we all experience.
Well, as you talk about that, I'm reminded of a number of Bible verses about the pain of childbearing and the analogy that can be drawn about the birth of a nation and one's sorrow being turned into joy and gladness.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm used to it in Hebrew. It's hard for me to translate into English. Sowing in sadness and reaping in joy. Yeah, it comes directly from the Psalms. And unfortunately, the creation of this country, which is celebrating 75 years, was forged in struggle with a lot of sadness.
Well, thank you for sharing that at the opening here. I want to now transition into your origin story. We'll come back to the story of Israel. We'll talk a little bit about its relationship to the United States, comparing our two nations, their age, their birth, their circumstances. But I want to know a little bit more and share with our audience your origin story. And by that, I mean, where do you come from? Even the months and years leading up to your arrival on this planet. What were the circumstances of your arrival?
Okay. I was born and grew up in New Jersey until I was 18, and I grew up in a sort of typical middle class, what we would call conservative Jewish home, where I went to Hebrew. I grew up in a small town, and so I was aware of being part of a sort of ethnic religious minority. and very, very aware of it. It was, even though it was New Jersey, it seemed like the Midwest in that sense. And, I went to Hebrew school, and we were all very aware that other kids were out playing basketball on Saturday morning, and we had to go to this thing called Hebrew school, which we all did to our bar and bat mitzvahs. I should mention at this point that my father's father, it turns out, became a big part of my story later. My father's father was born here in Jerusalem in 1880 and lived for the first 20 years of his life here. And my great grandparents on my father's side were the first ones to come here. So later, when I came here, I was really exploring my roots in a very personal, physical, realistic way. But I didn't grow up with any of that. I grew up typically American. My family moved to California, and I moved to California with them and started college in California, and really had, my big aspiration was to be a writer, journalist, and really did not think at all about my own spiritual roots. And it was
where in California were you?
I went to Berkeley and lived in Berkeley. My family lived in Southern California. I moved to Northern California.
And when you mentioned 1880, is that when your grandfather arrived, or had your family already been in the Holy Land in the Jerusalem area before?
Already been there. From there, his great grandparents had come here. My great grandfather, who was a well-known rabbi in Hungary, came here with his numerous children and more numerous grandchildren in 1870 at the age of 70. And
Wow.
my grandfather was born 10 years later in 1880.
So that was significant then, because it's my understanding and awareness that there's this set of documents known as the Edicts of Toleration, in which the Ottoman Empire allowed those of Jewish background to begin purchasing land in the mid 1840s.
You're right about the documents, but not the dates. And the 1840s, even into the 1850s, they were not allowed to purchase land. It was only later. And one of the reasons it happened was because of the increasing influence of the European countries. The Ottoman Empire was really not able to sustain itself without outside propping up by various countries at various times, England and France. And as part of that, there was a process of liberalization that went on, including the possibility of Jews to own land. So that when my great grandfather came, and by the way, we found his grave on the Mount of Olives.
Wow.
When my great grandparents came on, actually on both sides, they were part of a process that made a Jewish majority in Jerusalem by 1870. It's something that a lot of people are not aware of.
Right. So I know that when we were just in Jerusalem, that's why we'll get to the story of
Right.
our chance meeting
Right.
in a little bit. But we were up on the Mount of Olives, and of course, there are a lot. So to find a grave, there are lots and lots and lots of graves, and many of them, if not most, are Christian because of the anticipation of the return of the Messiah. Is that not correct? Or there's at least been a desire of Christians to be buried on Mount Olive.
Well, the main Christian cemetery there is actually down in the valley, across from the Church of All Nations, if you know where that is. But that big mass that you see is the Jewish cemetery, and it goes all the way around the slope. But there was sort of a parallel yearning, this idea of being picked up by some spiritual force on the way that's going to the area of the temple, is something you see in early biblical belief, going back to Zechariah the prophet, Zechariah 14, where the Mount of Olives is going to split in two. And that's one of the reasons why so many Jews wanted to be buried there. And then it's something that became paralleled in Christianity as well, with the last appearance of Jesus on the Mount of Olives. So it's an interesting, and there's a Muslim component to it also, that people will go through the sort of the gates of justice going to that spot. So it's interesting the parallels between the different traditions.
Wonderful. So then,
we're going all over the place already. That's good.
No, it's wonderful. I mean, it's such a joy talking with you. So, but at some point, those early aspirations of writing and journalism, I know we'll get to that as well, because you have written and published a novel, I believe. We'll get to that. But along the way, well, maybe now is the time to sort of set that stage. So in 1981, I was studying theology and a unit on biblical archaeology. It wasn't my focus or even a minor, but I did a unit on that, and studying ancient Israel was part of our theological curriculum. And the reason being that I was quite familiar with what you were sharing about the Sabbath and the day beginning at sunset. The evening and the morning were the first day. The evening and the morning were the second day from Genesis. Right. Because growing up, for part of my childhood, I was in a religious group that was celebrating Jewish holy days and celebrating the Sabbath, even though we were Christian. And this was the degree that I was obtaining. And so we had an intense interest in ancient Israel. And I traveled to Israel in 1981 to participate in the City of David Archaeological expedition. Fast forward many years, and I took my family there to see the archaeological park that has grown around this initial pile of dirt and rubble that was being investigated back in 1981 under the late Dr. Shiloh. And lo and behold, you and I connected at the City of David Archaeological Park, where you are a guide. So tell us a little bit about where that interest came. You mentioned perhaps your grandfather. What are the reasons for your interest in biblical archaeology, and what led you to become a guide there?
Let me mention first that I'm a guide licensed and educated by the Ministry of Tourism for the entire country. I just happen to be bringing people to the City of David, and I love the City of David, and it's maybe my favorite place in the whole country. But I'm not specifically, I don't work at the City of David. I'm not a guide for the City of David. They do have specific guides. I guide all around the country. But being a Jerusalem-based guide, I go there a lot, and I go there as much as I can. The way, if anybody had told me that I would be a guide in Israel, I wouldn't have even known that such a thing exists. As I said, I was in Berkeley, California, and after that, I went into journalism, and I got a journalism job in Denver, Colorado, which I loved very much, a wonderful city, and I still have a couple of close friends there. And about 2.5 years into that, I was feeling angst and confusion, and where did I want to go, and so forth. And I quit my job and wandered through Europe for 6 months. Injured myself in Greece, and when my injury healed, I figured that's the end. I'm going back to the States, and I flew to Amsterdam, where I had a friend. I went to the Anne Frank house and spent the next 2 weeks sitting in a Jewish bookstore on the same canal as the Anne Frank house, the Prinsengracht. And then I turned around and came to Israel. And so I never made it back to the States. And I thought I would be here for 6 months, and I ended up being here for 3 years. And during that period, I'm giving this is all leading to it. During that period, I first started out on a kibbutz, like a lot of people do, and I went to a Hebrew course on a kibbutz. And then I lived for 9 months in the Kabbalistic city of Tzfat. And then I decided it was time to confront my Jewish heritage. And I came to Jerusalem with a friend of mine and entered a program of Jewish study. And after that, I could not get enough of this place. I just had to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And one day I woke up and said it was time to immigrate. And I walked in and became an immigrant. If anyone had told me that, I could not have believed it. And then shortly afterwards, I met my wife. So it all worked out. So, and we went back to the States for a while and came back. And at that point, I needed to make a living. And English journalism, as you can guess, is very narrow here. There aren't too many possibilities. And I learned about guiding, and I applied for it and got into the course and realized this is just fantastic. This was made for me. I got to learn history, which I loved. I majored in and loved. Walk around the country, which I loved hiking. Meet people from all over the world. Be immersed in Bible. It was just the perfect combination. And that's how I became a guide. And then ironically, once I had a field guiding and knowledge of the country, then I actually ended up writing a travel column for the Jerusalem Post, which I had not been able to enter before. I had not been able to knock through that wall beforehand, but suddenly I was able to do it.
We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be returning with more on Allan Rabinowitz. This seemed like an apropos time to introduce an ad from our sponsor, Something or Other Publishing.
And welcome to Something or Other Publishing, or as our friends like to call us, SOUP. SOUP is a platform that connects authors, readers, and service providers in one convenient place. Choose SOUP if you're an author with a great book idea and you're looking for a publisher offering hands-on coaching in some of the best royalties in the business. Or if you're a reader who enjoys engaging with celebrated and emerging authors. We already have over 3,000 of them, and more are joining every day. You can even win free books by voting on their book ideas. Or maybe you're a service provider and you're looking to engage with over 3,000 authors. We're here to help. So whether you're an author, a reader, or a service provider, you're in the right place at SOUP. Contact us at help@soupllc.com to learn more.
That's amazing. So when I arrived in 1981, I was a huge fan of Elijah because he was the prophet that called down fire from heaven, that taunted the false prophets and their gods in a humorous way that appealed to me as a teenager and a young man, and then took care of the problem of idol worship in a dramatic way. But then he also found himself hiding in a cave with the rulership of the nation of he was in Israel, not in Judah, right? So the northern kingdom, Israel,
Right.
seeking his life, and him having an encounter with God that sort of changed his view of God. Even though he was the prophet who was worshiping the true God, turns out he didn't really know the true God either, based on that cave experience. So I had all this swirling through my head as I arrived on the shores of Haifa and then visited Elijah's cave and saw this sign about the sacred nature, the holy nature of that mountain, of that cave for Eretz Israel. So I want to talk for a moment about the founding of that nation and the city of David, because when I was there, I sat down and listened to you tell about the stone wall where I had sat as a digger in 1981 on that same stone wall, and I listened to the story that you told at that stone wall, and you were telling the story of David and Nathan the prophet and
Right.
his sin of adultery with Bathsheba. So that evokes for me that moment of Elijah in the cave, what Christians might call a come to Jesus moment, although Jesus was obviously not involved in that per se. The point being, the city of David and David's path and his qualifications and his personal journey is really, in a sense, summed up in that story of his response to Nathan the prophet. So I thought maybe you could share that in the context of Israel and its roots and its history and King David.
I'd be happy to do that. Usually, as you know, I'm out in the field doing this, able to point to various things. So it's a little different to do it this way, but I think we could do it. We are sitting there in the city of David, and above us up the slope, we know there is the Temple Mount with the Dome of the Rock on it, and that is the place where the temple stood, the Temple of Solomon, the Temple of Nehemiah, the Temple of Herod. But when David was here, it was before any of those temples. But what he did do when he conquered the city was to bring the Ark of the Covenant and put it up on top of that hill under a canopy. And that really is what made Jerusalem, Jerusalem. And we have to understand that according to the Bible, if we just accept that in face value right now, that what was in that was the 10 Commandments. So that sort of sets the stage and the tone for everything that happened. And then we have the story where David is looking out from the place of that wall, from his palace, which looks out over the sloped city with its graded roofs, its terraced roofs down the hillside, where he can see everything. And he sees a beautiful woman bathing on the roof, and he wants her and sends somebody to get her, and he takes her because he's the king. And as I said at the time, in any other country in the world at that time, the response would have been, so what? That is what kings did and had the right to do. They were seen as divine or semi-divine. And this doesn't come from me, by the way. This comes from his name is slipping my mind, but there is a great religious sociologist of religion who points this out also, that the general pattern of morality at the time for kings was broken here at this point in this story. Because what happens? David gets Bathsheba pregnant, tries to hide it by bringing her husband back, who is actually a commander in his army fighting for him. It doesn't work. The commander is too moral. Uriah, the commander, is too moral and says, no, I can't go to my wife when my men are in the field. David tries to get him drunk. He still won't do it. And in one of the great cynical gestures of the Bible, he sends him back to the front, carrying his own death sentence. But what happens then? Number one, the prophet Nathan confronts him, confronts the king. And number two, and this is very, very important, Nathan leaves with his head on his shoulders. How's that for something rare in the ancient world? And number three, the king admits his sin. And number four, it's all written down. No deleted tapes or emails or anything. It's all written down for everyone to see.
And you jumped over, for me, a critical detail. He had his death warrant, delivered it, and then the army pulled back and left him exposed. So David literally murdered him.
And everybody knew it and cooperated with the king. You're absolutely right. And one more point that came to me is, when Nathan is confronting him, what is he actually saying? I mean, not word for word in the Bible, but what is the subtext of it? Up there on that hill is the Ark of the Covenant with the 10 Commandments that says, thou shalt not murder and thou shalt not commit adultery. Hello? Who do you think that was for?
And Nathan has this great analogy about a man with one sheep who loved that sheep. And then there's this moment where Nathan says, you are that man, David.
He zaps him. He just zaps him. He shoots an arrow right into him. And this is very important because, as you know, and I assume we'll get to, your relationship with Elijah is paralleled by my relationship with Jeremiah. And Jeremiah is one of a long line of prophets that is starting with Nathan. And the role of the prophets is very crucial because, of course, they didn't have what we would call a free press, but there was, in a sense, free prophecy. The prophets had a role, and they had an important role of acting as the critics and the dissidents. And that was a time-honored and respected and protected role all the way through history.
The fourth estate with a divine charter. So the name of this show, Created in the Image of God, subtext, the role of religion in society. You can see how critical this story is, right? Because in the foundations of Jewish thought around nationhood, right? And we could go into the story of Saul, Jonathan, David. This is when Israel was coming out of slavery, looking to their savior God, but then looking for some version of human leadership, wanting to be like the nations around them and have a king, which God advised against, but then allowed. And then they now had a king, and God is working through the lessons to teach those leaders and the people. You're going to be okay. You want to be like the other nations, but I want you to be different. I want you to be a shining city on a hill. I want the other nations to come to you and see that you're different. And I want them to ask the reason for that difference. And the reason is the wisdom of the laws that I, the eternal, am giving you, right? Is that a fair summary of the origins?
Well, I think that was the ongoing tension, that because this was played out in the world of very real politic, because after all, the morality that was sitting in those tablets on top of that hill in that Ark of the Covenant were a very deep, divine, universal morality. But the people down below are just like any people, right?
Right.
And with all the, it's not that the people were at a higher level, it was that they were given this gift. And so you might say that the inner core of the history for the next several hundred years is the struggle between that moral core and the very real struggles for power that you find everywhere at every time in history.
Yep. And so fast forward, we have
Fast forward.
the establishment of the United States of America. And it's founded on the Judeo-Christian, whatever word we want to add, principles, history, ideologies. And this nation where I live, the United States, is going through a struggle about its origins and the original sins which were committed, as part of the establishment and founding of this nation, including slavery, including racism, issues that were contributory to a civil war in this country. America is a relatively young nation itself, but Israel is an even younger nation. And when I was there in 1981, it was, younger than today, obviously by 40 plus years.
Right.
So there's like a compression, right, of the journey that the Israeli nation state is going through with that rich history going back many thousands of years, and an even more direct connection to that history than, let's say, America, founded on Judeo-Christian principles. And Israel has gone through a transition as a nation. So the role of religion in society is front and center in Israel, in a way that, yes, in America as well, but even more intense in Israel. What is your experience with that sort of migration, and how does that color your thinking about the roots that we just talked about with King David and other, Jeremiah and the prophets, that you've shared so far?
Okay,
Especially in light of, Memorial Day and Independence Day. Big, broad question, but
yeah, I think you've managed to cover a couple of thousand years with that. So I'm going to let my answer wander within that,
perfect.
because it's extremely general. I think I can only speak to my own personal experience in that. First of all, I never expected to leave America. I love America. It's not like I left because I had some deep ideological grudge with America or anything like that. In fact, I cherish what I feel are the central principles of what America brought to the world. At the same time, I felt coming here I felt, and this is where the personal and you might say the national blend, I felt that my fate here really made a difference. It something that took time. You've mentioned the politics. It's sort of like a pressure cooker of politics. If it's not one thing, it's another. I mean, the kind of crisis we're going through today is really no different than other crises that have happened periodically in this very concentrated time of 75 years. But for me, because I came here and studied and I went through a huge spiritual transition, and without that spiritual transition, I would not have decided to stay here. It was because of that spiritual, I wouldn't call it transition, I would call it a revolution, an inner revolution that led me to the next step of wanting to live here. And because I'm so steeped in the Bible and in the history, it gives me a longer view of what's happening today. I tend to look at what's happening today as just one more facet of a story that is much deeper, that I might not fully understand where it's going, but that I feel extremely happy and blessed and privileged to be part of. So it's difficult for me to separate those strands out. I don't know if that's too abstract for you. I would like to add that
not at all. Not at all.
I'm not the only one who's gone through this kind of process. I have many friends who have gone through something similar and decided to not grow up with a Zionist ideology, but came to it through their own exploration and made this leap for similar reasons. And that is what anchors me and balances me and keeps me from feeling despair when I might see something that is particularly troublesome. Plus, I also think it's important to remember when we're talking about the crises and so forth, that we have to remember that it's not simply verbiage to say this place is really a miracle. I mean, the development that's going on in Israel is just phenomenal. And the contribution and how it has transformed in 75 years. And even in the time when you and I first came here. I first came here in 78. You came here in 81. It is just phenomenal. And I feel like I'm part of something that, in a sense, is beyond average, normal, everyday history.
Well,
and that's what makes it very exciting to be here.
Well, and going back to 81, so after Haifa, we traveled to Jerusalem to participate in the dig for 6 weeks, stayed on a kibbutz. Ramat Rachel is where we stayed during that time. And later we went into the Sinai Desert. 81, I'm trying to remember if it had been captured. I think, yes, it had been captured from Egypt, but there was still, I don't know, the status was unclear. But anyway, so in Jerusalem, I was confronted with, security pit for suspicious articles, right? Where,
right.
Yes, don't leave your bag anywhere because it will be thrown into that pit and you will never get it back.
And blown up.
Right, exactly. And then
your underwear will be flying all over the place.
Speaking of, unfortunately, while we were there was an attack on a bus, and they were shelling Kiryat Shimona at that time from the Golan Heights, and all of this was going on around us, even while we were there at the dig. And at the dig itself, I remember watching, and I have photos of this, where Dr. Yigael Shilo was viciously attacked by ultra-Orthodox Jews who were claiming that the dig site was on a burial site, and that they had found
a cemetery. Yeah,
right. And I remember they had the curls and the hats and the dark, but they like put their fingers in their ears and they were ululating. They were like making this noise, causing a big disturbance as some of them went and physically attacked Dr. Shilo. And I was reminded of Stephen in the Bible when it said they stopped their ears and rushed upon him and stoned him. I was like, watching something similar happen. They didn't actually stone him, but they were physically beating him up, while some of them were, putting their fingers in their ears and making that noise. And it just, brought that to life. This show emphasizes something different from Elijah, right? This show emphasizes that religion should inspire and not coerce. So religion in the modern age, the evolution of religion and its role in society, should tap back into that thing that we talked about, the shining city on the hill, where the nations would voluntarily come and in that sense humble themselves, but ask questions. What is it about you and your people that's unique? So religion should inspire and not coerce. And what is your thought on that? And in terms of, the drama that goes around us all day, and is that something we'll ever get to where religion is inspiring people and we're not coercing each other into submission and obedience?
Okay, again, your question is adequately general enough for me to go where I want with it.
Please,
So,
please
so
do.
you touched upon the junction, the contact between a society, a political entity, and religion, which is, as we know, always touchy and always problematic, and especially here for several reasons, because it is constructed as a Jewish state, so we have to figure out what that means, and also as a democracy. So there's an intent, there's a built-in tension between that balance that's always trying to be worked out, and also because of the particular political system that we have, which is a legislative democracy rather than what we have in the United States. So it depends on coalitions and so forth. You have this mixing of religious political parties who are part of the government, and that's part of what is playing out right now, and that can be problematic, and it can cause a lot of tensions, political tensions, doubled up on religious tensions. And the people that you are talking about, who we will characterize loosely as ultra-Orthodox, they stand out because physically they have a very different appearance, and for some people this is sort of the stereotypical view of what a Jew is, and there's many problems with the community. However, I'd like to take the longer view in several aspects. One is that historically, these people have had an incredibly important role, because in societies where Judaism and Jewish communities were physically and socially and culturally and in every sense under real threat and pressure of destruction, they are what held it together.
And let me just interject and say that I in no way meant to in any way diminish them in this situation.
Understand.
I have the utmost respect for their beliefs and the zeal and seriousness with which they take the word of God.
I definitely understand that. But because they're very visible and very strongly organized, it's easy to focus on them and to say, oh, the ultra-Orthodox are this and the ultra-Orthodox are that. And as we can guess, like everything, it's a lot more complex than that, both in terms of what they contribute historically to the Jewish people, and also who they are within their communities. My wife has worked with a lot of them. She teaches, or has over the years, teaches courses to ultra-Orthodox women who are starting businesses and so forth. And she has had incredibly unique exposure to that community. And as you can guess, it's a lot more multifaceted than what we see either in the political forum or on the medium. At the same time, I can't pretend that there are not schisms, and it is unfortunate that a people that is so small to begin with. I mean, how many are there in the world? Maybe 14 million, if that. That a population that is so small tends to split up into fragments within that. And I think it's partly because of this deep dynamic energy. And when you have this deep dynamic energy and focus and study and so forth, then it's going to lead in many different directions, and it's going to have a lot of tensions within it.
We're going to go to a quick commercial break again and be back with the conclusion of the interview with Allan Rabinowitz. I just wanted to highlight, as we were talking about schisms and the divides that enter in even within a religion, within a sect, and across the religions, that the ad that we're about to show for the anthology around heaven and hell gets into that topic in a unique way. I want to encourage you to take a moment to watch this short video, and hopefully some of you will be inspired to contribute, not just in terms of the comments below about the cover, which we'll see at the end, but also to contribute a piece, a thought piece, or to invite somebody that you know to contribute to this anthology on the subject of heaven and hell. We'll be right back.
The concept of heaven and hell has been a central idea throughout human thought and cultural history. From ancient civilizations to modern religions, people have explored the nature of the afterlife and the potential consequences of their actions during their lifetime. Royal Falcon Press Imprint presents a new project seeking diverse perspectives on the fundamental human theme of heaven and hell. Our goal is to create an anthology that provides readers with a rich and nuanced exploration of heaven and hell throughout human history, inviting writers to draw from a wide range of sources and authors, including religious texts such as the Bible and the Quran, philosophical treatises like Plato's Republic, and modern works like Neil Gaiman's The Sandman series, or Mitchell Baum's The 5 People You Meet in Heaven. We would love to have your input on the final cover for this thrilling new endeavor. Choose your favorite among these options and let us know your pick in the comments. Scan the QR code to read more about Heaven and Hell Across History and Religions by Wade Fransson, and register for the final cover choice.
One of
Wonderful.
the things, let me just jump for a moment. One of the things you find in Jerusalem, in all of the 3 religions, is that sometimes the gaps and the squabbles and the oppositions within each of the 3 faiths are just as harsh and sometimes more complex than between them.
Right. Well, I can certainly attest to that in my own experience. As a Christian heretic, reverse Messianic Jew, and the specific narrow path that we followed and that I followed during my time as a minister in that, which, I'm no longer in that for many years now. But emerging, and the reason for this show and this is to have this kind of discussion and to continue to analyze the Word of God through a multifaceted approach in which we consult, and those differing views, or as it says in the Psalms, like iron sharpening, or Proverbs, iron sharpens iron. So a man sharpens the countenance of his friend, right? And in the Baha'i faith, we've got a similar, only in the clash of differing opinions does the shining spark of truth emerge, right? So sometimes there's going to be a clash, and hopefully that clash is always of opinions, right? And warfare is no longer a legitimate way to settle our differences, right? Whereas to your point about morality of kings in the past and morality of nations in the past, it's a relatively new development that going to battle and killing each other is not a legitimate way to settle differences. Um, so thankfully, we are continuing to move forward towards that path of peace and to inspiring each other to better deeds, to better paths, to better understanding, rather than trying to coerce each other into that. So thank you so much for being on the show. I want to take a moment now to talk about your writing and the novel that you wrote. Tell us a little bit about that.
That novel, which is called The Disciple Scroll, was a direct outgrowth from my Jewish studies and being a guide. First, in my Jewish studies, one of the things that really pulled me in was the Bible more than I ever expected. The Hebrew scriptures I'm speaking of. And then when I went to school to be a guide, and it's a 2-year program, 2-year part-time, but in reality, it felt like full-time. And to actually travel these areas, such as the City of David and others, it just became alive for me in a panorama, like just a huge, wide frame movie. And I decided that that's where I wanted to go in terms of my writing, in terms of my first novel, which I'd been wanting to write for a long time, that I wanted to leap and dive into that. And I was very, very influenced by Jeremiah as a man of conscience who stood up against all of organized society. And also, it's a very vivid book. Of the prophetic books, I would say it's probably the most physical and materialistic in terms of talking about people and characters and stories. And I was pulled into it. And I was actually doing a graduate degree at the University of Minnesota in English and creative writing. And I decided that I wanted to use this as the framework of a novel. And then fortunately, I came across the idea of doing it from the point of view of his scribe, who's a real character mentioned in the book of Jeremiah, Baruch, the son of Neriah. And I wrote it as a memoir, in a sense, as a journal, a story told by Baruch, trying to tell his own family about his life with this prophet Jeremiah. And I wrote it while I was guiding, and it was a very long struggle, and I could not find a publisher. And then, with the encouragement of my wife and friends, I put it out myself, and I'm very, very gratified at what the result is. So, it's not a physical book; it's an e-book on Amazon, and the first 50 pages can be checked out. And everything came together for me. My love of the nature, my love of the history, my fascination with the Bible, and this large canvas of a story, and I just poured everything into it. And I would have liked it to be picked up by a publishing company and be interviewed on Oprah Winfrey and all that, but it didn't happen. And who knows what will be in the future. But I'm already working on another one because that's what I want to do when I'm not guiding.
Well, as some of our guests will have seen through some of the ads we've played, Something or Other Publishing is a primary sponsor of the show, as well as Planksip, which is a Canadian media company. And we'll have to facilitate some introductions and some discussions. I can already think of a couple of ideas that I can share after the show on that one. So thank you so much. So where can people pick that up today if they want to read that?
It's on Amazon. If you just look on Amazon or even Google The Disciple Scroll by Allan Rabinowitz, it will come up, and you can check out the first 50 pages. It's not very expensive. I wanted it to be read, so I purposely kept the price really low.
We'll see if we can create a QR code and display it during the show so people can download it and access it right there. So Allan, I think I've gone through most of the questions that I had for you, but what did we miss? What do you want to share with the audience, or what's next for you?
Well, if I'm allowed to say this, I would like to say that I would like to urge whoever is listening to your show to ignore the headlines of the media and come to Israel and experience for yourself whatever your own religious background is. It will, as you know, it transforms lives. Even people who come as tourists, they think they're tourists, but they're really pilgrims. And it is a fascinating, totally unique place in the world. And ironically, it's listed by several insurance institutions as one of the safest countries to travel in, which might be surprising, but nevertheless, it's true. And it is a wonderful, special experience.
Well, we were there with my whole family, as you saw.
Here on 75 years as a modern state, I would like to put myself aside for the moment and say, come and visit. It will be a turning point experience for you.
Well, as you know, I was there with my whole family. We
Right.
briefly met, and
That was an amazing coincidence, if there are coincidences.
right. While we were in Haifa, my daughter, who's a gymnast, and by the way, proud father, we just got back from Minnesota where she took first overall in her category at regionals, which is a multi-state tournament. And to her credit, I told her, I said, Zoe, and I got this quote, I forget who I got it from recently, but I said, we do not rise to the occasion. We sink to the level of our training. We sink to the level of our training. And when we were in Israel, she wanted to go work out in a gym with weights. And we didn't know how that was going to happen. I said, Zoe, we'll make it happen. We'll make it happen. So below our, we did an Airbnb, and there was like a nutrition shop. We went in there. There was an Arab gentleman, I believe, Arab, who was running this nutrition shop. We said, look, my daughter's trying to find a gym. He took her under his wing. He got her a temporary membership at the gym where he was at. And he was so happy to be able to help this American family. Similar experiences in the grocery stores and in the bakeries, all the diversity of people that we met throughout our entire stay. We had a tour guide that drove us around Jerusalem for a day called Moses. One wonders about going with a tour guide taxi driver called Moses about getting lost, but he found it easy to get us to where we needed to be. We had our car. I left the lights on when we stopped at the Dead Sea, and another tour guide came out and he called his friend, and they came and they jump cabled our car all for free. The people were so friendly and wonderful everywhere we went the entire time in Israel.
This is very true. And if I can, I'd like to add a very fast story that I just read this morning, which fits very much with what you're saying. Before the Sabbath, everybody is in the morning before the Sabbath, everybody is doing their grocery shopping for the Sabbath, for Shabbat. And in one grocery store in a big city along the coast, something happened to the computers and everything went blank, and they couldn't compute the cost. They couldn't take money for any of the transactions, and it was coming close to Shabbat. And the manager of the store made a decision. We're talking about 100 people who were waiting in line at the cash register. And he said, take your food, go for Shabbat, and come back and pay after Shabbat. And virtually everybody did. And they did not lose any money. We're talking about 100 people who made a point of coming back and paying what they owed.
Wow. I think in the context of we don't rise to the occasion.
That's a very special story, I think.
Yeah. We don't rise to the occasion. We sink to the level of our training. Religion is about providing a path, in my opinion, for that training, for inculcating it into our daily way of life. We won't get it perfect, our understanding of the holy texts will be imperfect, but as we seek to practice, to put into action those divine messages, those divine inputs, to your point about kings of the past and David that we talked about, each of us individually can and should be a little bit more like King David, willing to take ourselves into account and to improve.
Right. It's like Nathan was saying, like, what is represented by that thing up on the hill? It's not just a cultic object. What does it represent? And that's what we all strive for.
Allan, thank you so much for your time. We will absolutely invite you back. Your fading, your video is fading a little bit. The connection, the Independence Day must be coming closer, where sorrow is turned into joy. We wish you a wonderful Independence Day. This show will actually be airing later during Independence Day in Israel at 8:00 Central Time tonight. This is pre-recorded.
Wonderful. Thank you, Wade. It's been a joy.
Mazel tov, all the best. We hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. Bye.
That was the interview with Allan Rabinowitz, Israeli tour guide, that I and my family serendipitously ran into when we were visiting the City of David Archaeological Park, where many decades ago I had worked. I'm going to go quickly here and share Allan Rabinowitz's book, which you can see here on Amazon.com. The Disciple Scroll, 4.5 stars, 63 ratings, a very inexpensive $3.99. I have put the link in the chat. So go ahead and click on that link, download a copy of Allan's book, The Disciple Scroll. And Russell, you had some comments in there when I posted the link in the chat. It said something went wrong and told me to reload the page. I clicked reload and you disappeared. Your comments disappeared. Come back, Russell. All is forgiven. I didn't purposefully vaporize your comments, which were perhaps somewhat critical of religion and the followers of religion or the teachers of religion. We'd love to have you jump back in and share some of the comments. It looks like perhaps our co-host Dan Sanderson is able to access some of those quotes and share them. Let's bring Dan on screen as well. There he is. Dan, having had the chance to, like the audience, watch that interview, what pearls of wisdom, what reactions, what thoughts do you have to share about tonight's sessions? And you're on mute. You're speechless. You're speechless.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost it's like the secular guy in me is the one that's speechless. So I feel like I don't. In one hand, I could say that I don't have what you and Allan share, but I think fundamentally I do. I think it's not. I think it's in everybody, and I think. That's what's contagious, and he feels like a very inspired man, a very centered human being, and I could sense that energy between the two of you in the recorded interview. A lot of excitement from yourself, especially that moment when the story of the King David, being brought to justice by his community. I thought that was really powerful. I could feel that swell inside your voice. Like it felt the pointing of the finger. That felt very, very powerful, right?
J'accuse.
But the only time that you want to be able to accuse, when you know that with every fiber of your being that's not allowed by anybody on the planet.
Well, it's interesting because that story, I'm very familiar with that story, as you could tell. And when I sat down as a member of the audience in front of the built wall there at the City of David to just listen to Allan while he was a tour guide, I kind of crashed. And there's several stories I could tell about the group that he was taking from Canada, by the way. And there's a story there that I don't know if you and I talked about this, but I'm off track already. So as I sat down in the audience and listened to him, and he began to tell about the story of David, what's exciting to me about that story isn't the fact that justice was served, which is great. Justice should be served. We all love justice. Justice, social justice, certainly a theme today. What has always been exciting to me about that story is David's repentance. The fact that a powerful king acknowledged and repented and was forgiven and continued to rule. However, there were consequences. There were divine consequences. There were social consequences. The nation as a whole suffered as a result of the consequences. Perhaps one reason for the later progression and the emphasis on forgiveness that comes with the next dispensation with Jesus. And it's not, and this is my view, it's not that everything was changed. It's not that Jesus changed everything, in my opinion. It's that Jesus brought other things to the foreground. And by definition, when you bring things to the foreground, other things must, ergo, therefore, recede into the background. It doesn't mean that those things are not important. It doesn't mean that those things are not still foundational. But by virtue of drawing one's attention to different aspects, one moves one's attention away from those other aspects. And so the lesson of King David is not one of revolution. It's one of evolution, perhaps. It's one of course correction. The definition of sin, one definition of sin is missing the mark. It's like you take an arrow and you shoot it at a bullseye and you don't hit the bullseye. It doesn't mean you miss the target entirely. And the next time you take another shot and maybe you're going to do a little better. Today, so often, that whole accountability thing, they want to completely destroy another human being, right? Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, restitution, reparations. Many of these concepts, when taken to an extreme, are more destructive than the original. And the power of forgiveness and overcoming sin together, rather than elevating oneself into the seat of power and authority and moral judgment and moral superiority. All of that is really evoked to me by the story of David and David's repentance. Nothing can really wash away what he did entirely. And like I said, there were consequences. And yet repentance holds out that promise of complete washing away, of getting rid of the stench that cannot be gotten rid of. Restitution of a human being. And David is celebrated as a result of that.
Well, I mean, two things come to mind when you bring that up. I was driving back thinking about that story, and I had heard it before, as I told you, but I thought, what about the poor woman? I mean, her life is absolutely destroyed. Maybe. I mean, maybe not completely, but...
Well, the woman was the father of David's child, Solomon, right? The woman... And it's interesting, and there are these fractals in the Bible, and yes, I get extremely excited about it. I see the fingerprints of God all over it, but you've got Eve, and you've got the curse, right? What was the curse? In sorrow shall you bring forth your children. The birth of Israel, the the evoking the day of memorial followed by the day of independence and establishing the nation. A nation that was born in a day is another prophecy. The joy, the pain of childbirth, delivering the child. Well, the curse for Eve was, I will put enmity between you and the serpent, and he shall bruise your heel, and you shall bruise his head. And then in pain you shall give childbirth, and then you have her delivering the firstborn son Cain, who kills the secondborn son Abel, right? And so her childbirth was not just painful. She had to watch her firstborn son become a murderer and kill the second born son, his brother, her other son. And yet she was a mother to both of these. And Bathsheba, as much of all this was going on, Solomon was her son. And Solomon was the celebrated person who was able to build the house of God, which God didn't even allow David to build. He said, "You're a bloody man." And was it the blood of war, or was it the fact that he had murdered the first husband of his wife, who gave him this son, but the son was allowed to build the temple? And Solomon was celebrated in that he was given, the story of the genie and the wishes. Solomon was given a wish from God, and Solomon asked for wisdom. He didn't ask for riches or power. He asked for wisdom. So, there's all these sort of swirl of things and ideas and fractal patterns in terms of the stories in the Bible. And so I'm way off on a million tangents here when you mention her as a mother, but she gave birth to the son of promise. Solomon was the son of promise who was able to build the temple.
Is there anything written in Scripture about Solomon, or any wisdom? That's where I like to focus. Is there any wisdom about Solomon, knowing who his biological father was and the circumstances around that? I mean, what do the Scriptures say about that?
That's a great question. I've actually not reflected on that, and I'm not aware of any. There was strife in David's family, right? The other son, Absalom, I don't know if you know the story of Absalom, who betrayed his father and stole the hearts of Israel away from David. And David was actually at war with his son, and Absalom met a tragic fate in which he was fleeing, and he ended up hanging himself when his hair got caught in a tree. But yeah, I'd like to. It's another angle I had not thought of to look at. Yes, to what degree was Solomon aware, and to what degree did that have an impact? And is there a record or a story?
Or did it shape him? Or
right?
I'd be really interested to know about that. And then,
what we do know about Solomon, according to the story, is that he fell victim to his father's tendency, and he went to extreme excess. He had 300 wives and 700 concubines, and that these women, or his desire for these women, drew him away from worship and focus on the divine and on God.
Yeah, or any reflection about who his mother's husband was, right? His should-be father. We get the story of him being sacrificed on the battlefield, but what that does to a son and to a family, and to a woman, right? Like that's. But one thing that I notice about biblical stories is that they tend to emphasize the longer span historical wisdom. I'm not saying they necessarily gloss over the individual experiences, but I think sometimes that's a fault of our society, that we gloss over the individual experiences in the sake of, to give the most holy word that's defined by the Jewish faith and people, a people of hope. So, that's okay, my son, because, have hope and everything will work out, even if it's not in this lifetime. And that's, I guess, sometimes hard to take. And I don't mean take in a good way. I mean take in a, it doesn't seem like it's sufficient in terms of a totality of all-knowing wisdom. It's like we're missing something there, right? I think a total, complete wisdom would embody both of the time scales, both the experience and the longer time scales of history. And so, as a culture, as a religion, as a faith, if we focus too much on the multi-generational lineage or the transmission of wisdom across generations, I think we're missing something and we're giving something up. And I think it's worth talking about.
Yeah, there was a comment that Russell gave earlier. I don't know if you still have access to it. It's not in my feed. Let's just go on this one here. Christians pass by with audacious boasting, having zero quality control, convinced we are all God's children of the highest God. Well, so I understand where Russell is coming from here, but the whole point of tonight's show, the guts of it, the meat of it, says the opposite, right? Zero quality control. The prophet Nathan was that quality control for King David. Now, King David wasn't a Christian, right? But in the general context of what Russell is saying, he was, right? He was a theocratic leader. He was a religious leader, and the prophet held him accountable. And the idea that Jesus was crucified for our sins, the whole purpose and the whole intent is to hold ourselves accountable, to recognize that my behavior caused that death. Because of what I did, Jesus had to die. My Savior had to die because of what I did. It doesn't get any more quality control than that. So, Russell, I would have to say I pretty much fundamentally disagree with you, even though I understand where you're coming from. I get what you're saying, but you seem to be missing the entire point of Christianity and religion. As a Baha'i, I'm a Baha'i. The Baha'i faith has a quote that says, we must take ourselves into account every night. Every night we must take ourselves into account, for you know not when, and I'm mangling the quote now, but you know not when your days on earth will come to an end. You may not wake up. So you had better take yourself into account before you go to sleep. Where's the equivalent of that outside of religion, right? Where's the equivalent of such a divine judgment to where you will meet your maker, and you may meet your maker before you awake, and he may ask you, as David Byrne sang in Once in a Lifetime, my God, what have I done? Right? This is not my beautiful house. This is not my beautiful wife, right? Maybe that's the cry of King David, right? David Byrne meets Leonard Cohen, hallelujah, King David, right? My God, what have I done? Where is the equivalent of that outside of religion? So I'm not saying that anyone who doesn't have religion can't get there or doesn't get there. I am not remotely setting myself up above that. But I'm saying that from the perspective where I come from, and those who are sincere about their religion, this is utter nonsense, the zero quality control part.
Yeah.
Now, let me just add this whole idea of consultation, which I've frequently referred to and what we're trying to do on this show, which invites other people and treats them with respect and says, your opinion and God in you, whether you recognize it or not, I see God in you, and you, namaste, your face to mine has something to contribute. You're mirroring back something divine that I must pay attention to. So again, the idea of zero quality control is utter nonsense to me and my religious practice, my beliefs.
Here's another one from him. I don't know if you saw this one. Christians lure some, but insult others in public, as if those condemned to voting as a quality control, there's quality control again, would have any desire for leadership with one foot in Fantasyland. So, I mean, he's pulling quotes right out of, or not quotes, but thoughts right out of the Atheist Handbook, really. And
yeah, because I don't even understand what that last quote means. I mean, okay, fine. I don't get the connection. Those condemned to voting as a quality control. Well, we're all, I mean, whether you have religion or not, voting condemned. Well, I don't get the concept of condemned to voting as a quality control. Is it that religious folks see the non-religious as being condemned to voting as a quality control because Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. Therefore, I can say, look, I don't care because this isn't my world. You know, when Jesus returns, he will create a new world. I don't understand the context of what Russell is saying here. Perhaps you can enlighten me.
No, I mean, I guess the point that I really would like to break it down and look at it word for word, but it's hard on comments, right? It's really hard because there's several different ways that you can take the comment and you're not really sure that you're grabbing the essence of what he's trying to say. But I will say that I think I have the essence of what he's trying to say, and he's pulling it out of an Atheist Handbook. And the problem with that, and I would like to say that I also come from a similar background. I've never on this show declared that I am a person of faith. I am of secular faith, despite the contradiction and however that may sound. I do believe in the good. I do believe that we can be good, and everything that Wade says, this mimesis force that he sees when he talks about divinity, he sees a goodness in me reflecting back at him. And that's how we actually interact and grow together, is that we see that self-similarity. And that is the essence of people working together in a relationship of good, okay? And so that's your starting point. That's where we all have to understand that there's no value to the comment of what you're trying to say. Okay, there's zero value. If your starting point is to say, I'm going to give you the benefit I'm going to give you the benefit of the good, the benefit of the doubt that what you're going to do is we're going to work together in some sort of mutually beneficial way that is for some sort of greater good, then we have something to talk about.
Right, but if you're going to say because you're a Christian, you're a fool, because you as a Christian are calling other people fools.
Well, where's the wisdom in it?
Where's the pot? Where's the pot? Where's the pan calling who black? It's just, come on.
And the wisdom is, I always say this. It's easy for me, in a sense. Where's the wisdom in it? And secular man to secular man, societies that have religious tolerance prosper. They do better than societies that have persecute for religious beliefs. Okay, so
I think this is more what Russell is getting at. Thank you, Russell, for clarifying. So because Christians live in Fantasyland and suggest magic, they are electing people who live in Fantasyland. Voters don't want a leader with one foot in fantasy, but Christians are voters too, right? So you're dehumanizing. You're saying Christians don't have a right to vote, is what I'm hearing. Because Christians have some beliefs that you consider to be foolish, you want to what? Remove. There's a word in German and Swedish. I always I always struggle with finding an equivalent word in English, but basically it's you take away their rights. You take away their right to vote or to act, their agency. You treat them as a child. You take away their adulthood. Right. So because Christians are inferior intellectually to you, in your opinion, therefore they should not be allowed to vote. Right? That's what you're suggesting here, Russell? Is that there should be an entire class of people. If you want to believe in God, fine, but then you don't get to participate in democracy. And that's a superior ideology. Exactly why? And who gets to decide who else's viewpoint is worthy of having a vote?
Well, wait, I mean, it just doesn't it distill down to the whole theme of the show? What is the role of religion in society? And so maybe to give him a little bit of the benefit to give him the benefit of the doubt here, to say, look, is there, when it comes to running the country and politics, is there a way that we can keep religion separate and have your place of worship separate from the topics that need to be handled and the way the country needs to be run? And that's maybe more of the approach that I think he's asking. And let's take it more like a question.
Well, the U.S. Constitution incorporates those ideas already, and it's being debated, and there's a struggle going on around the idea of freedom of religion versus freedom from religion, right? So basically, and this is oversimplified, but it's the way I understand it, in America, you can serve, you can vote, you can be elected regardless of your religious beliefs.
Yeah.
And in that sense, if 80% of people believed exactly the same thing, they could try to even change the Constitution and enshrine that set of beliefs. But the Constitution is designed to guarantee that that doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't know what else to say about that.
So, well, basically, the way you're summarizing it is religion is fundamental to the United States Constitution, and probably that's why to this day you do not have a political leader that would openly run on a platform of being an atheist. It still does not happen to this day.
Well, but just like we had a black president, that was something that was deemed not possible. We didn't end up with a woman president, so that might be something that's deemed not possible. We do have a black female vice president now. So, how far are we away from having an atheist president? It's not that it couldn't happen. It's that it hasn't happened. There are also other types of presidents we haven't had. I mean, I guess at one point it was felt that we couldn't have a Catholic president, right? But wasn't Kennedy a Catholic? So all of these, things like that are not prohibited by the Constitution, right?
Yeah.
You can dislike the fact that we haven't had an atheist president yet, but I don't know what that really means. I don't know what we gain concretely from having an atheist president.
Well, the reason why I don't like the word atheist is that it sounds anti-good. It sounds like atheist to me sounds like, just
a different word, and I'll say that word.
Well, no, but I could say a secular, right? A good secular.
So what would a secular president bring that we haven't had in this president or that president, right? I don't know.
Right. I don't know. It depends on the
We'll
person
see.
and their.
We'll see when it happens, and then what was it? We had Alex Kaludner on here, and what was his first quote? He quoted Sowell, was it? Who said, "There's no solution, only compromises," or something like that. Remember when he started on artificial intelligence? That was his opening quote. you're
Compromises
choosing
or a series of trade-offs. It was from
trade-offs.
Thomas Sowell, and that's a brilliant quote. Yeah, I
Right.
really like that one. Yeah.
It's just a matter of trade-offs, right? And pick your poison is what I like to say. Pick your poison. Which is where I'm coming from on Russell. It's like I feel like his comments are basically saying, look, the problem is all these people that believe in the spaghetti monster are in charge, and they're always leading us down. The road to hell is paved with Christian beliefs. I mean, there's truth to that, right? There's definitely truth to that. The road to hell is paved with Christian beliefs because it's Christians who believe in hell. But yeah. Anyway.
Well, we're confusing a couple metaphors because isn't the spaghetti monster like the deity, the mocking deity of
Yes.
the atheist community, right? So that,
Yes.
but it's not. It's not like we don't really like to talk about politics here, but whoever our elected president is, or your elected president, I'm Canadian, whoever that is, he's of one particular side, and so he doesn't appear to have. Would you say he's religious? Would you say that religion dominates the
current
White House?
president?
Yeah,
Absolutely not. Personally, no. I think he well, I shouldn't say that. I mean, again, now I'm already getting into trouble because you brought up politics. I'm just saying that there's problems even with the current president and his own church right now because of certain beliefs, right? Where so this is a problem that won't be easily solved.
yeah. And it's not that we can't bring up politics. It's just that
I just don't want to say anything negative about
Yeah.
a political leader. It's not my job or role to comment on individual political leaders.
Yeah,
and something I want to avoid. There's a quote in the Baha'i faith that says, except to speak well of them, make no mention of the leaders.
Interesting. Well, I had a friend of mine. He's been on the show, Brent. He's a writer for Planksip, and he urged me to go and read the Baha'i teachings or literature. He said there's thousands of pages, and I didn't realize there was.
Oh yeah,
Really?
it's like 50 Bibles.
Really? Hey, wow, that's interesting. But about physics and particles and
well,
all sorts of interesting things.
the Baha'i revelation started. Well, the Baha'i era revelation started in 1844. So what was current among men in 1844 and on through the end, the writings they are ongoing in a sense from the Universal House of Justice of the Baha'i Faith, but those writings give direction and clarify there's no new revelation, and nothing they say or do can contradict the prior revelation. So in the Baha'i understanding, it will be at least 1,000 years, let's say from 1863. I'm not trying to be too specific, but 1,000 years from 1863, anytime after that, we can have another manifestation of God who can bring an updated revelation and course correction that will be necessary at that time. But the teachings that were given will last for 1,000 years as they were given. And those represent adequate guidance for that 1,000-year period.
So I'm not making fun at all. I'm just like a writer and a storyteller. I'm interested in that date. So theoretically, if I or we decided to co-author a fictional story together and call it 2853, 63, whatever, if we did that, then we could attempt to be somewhat prophetic. Could we not?
We could, and that's actually interesting from a very reality-based perspective. And this is why, and I share with my Baha'i friends that we're already 150 years into a situation in which it will be necessary for an update, right? Because we're still maybe in a kind of a honeymoon phase for my fellow Baha'is, but the teachings will have become so misunderstood and so corrupted that it will be necessary. Darkness will have fallen again and it will be necessary, it will be necessary for that enlightenment to come at that time. So at some point in that time, you have the arc of, dead of winter, and then you have the solstice, and then you begin to have warmth and light, and then you have the noonday sun, and then it begins to diminish again over time, right? So yeah, you could maybe try to think, where is the course correction going to be needed? I think for the average Baha'i, that's deemed not helpful because we're still trying to get the ball on the field,
Yeah.
if you will. And plus you could get into trouble, in my opinion, with that little thing called ego, or the insistent self. In Lucifer, let's take Lucifer from the Bible, right? What was the sin that Lucifer committed? He said, I will be like the Most High. I will ascend to the north, basically wanting to sit on the throne, wanting to declare himself God. It wasn't enough that he was the bringer of light. It wasn't enough that he was the messenger, that he was an angel, that he was the morning star. It wasn't enough for him.
But I'm gonna push back a little bit on this, because I do see a similarity with philosophers who in some way would be considered like false idols, right? I mean, we look at, to a certain degree, we worship Immanuel Kant, Arthur Schopenhauer, Friedrich Nietzsche. They've anchored themselves in Newton's edifice of Chartres, right? Like, we see further because of the shoulders that we're standing on, right?
Yep.
The giants that we're standing on. But let me describe an experience of somebody that's not me, maybe not you, but somebody that says, I need to write this down. I need to write something down, because as I live life, as I experience life, I see that the connections that I'm making and the relationships of what I see around me have to be written down. And we can say it's 1,000 years from now, okay?
Well, so
and it's
Dan,
not
Dan,
necessarily
I already do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think I even shared with you. Oh yeah, we were talking about this article. You had an opportunity, or you submitted and said, "Why don't we write this article?" And they came back and said, "Please be more specific about the nature of the article." And I shared with you the other day privately.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm all in, because I want it documented that this my idea, right? I want it published. This my idea that I believe is new and in a sense revolutionary, and yet I contextualize that idea within that parameter. So, when did Kant live, right? When did Nietzsche live? Again, the broad parameters that I would submit are, well, that was coming out of the Dark Ages, right? And the Dark Ages obviously were far distant in history, but that was the emergence of this new revelation. They weren't creating the waves, they were catching the waves, right? The issue came when they believed, right? And Icarus is another good example. They came close enough to the sun that it melted the wax in their wings. They forgot that they couldn't really fly.
Oh, Icarus is great as an example. I've tried to articulate this about. I do want to come back to this. I will. I'll suspend this because I think you're right. Actually, no. I'm gonna zero in on that, because as you write this, as you articulate it, and I want to talk and I want to focus on your experience of it. You try your best to just articulate it and to formulate the theory or the idea. Okay, and in that process, in that birthing process, there's no ego in that. You haven't given enough room to think about what that potential is, and you're not doing it for that potential because you can't do it for that potential. You're looking at that and you're saying, this needs to be written down, right? This needs to be communicated. It needs to be articulated. It needs to be brought into life. Yep. And that is the beauty of the creative mind that I think not all of us have, right? Not all of us have an idea. I remember sitting with a group of philosophers, and I said, do you guys know what an idea is? To come up with a new novel idea, one that would be relevant for the history books or relevant for something that described how we were as a human as humans? Do you know how difficult that is? And if you try and have it derive from some sort of extrapolation of ego, you're defeated before you even start.
Right, but having delivered that egg, right, then you fall in love with that egg. What's the mirror of Eriseth, right, where in Harry Potter, where the person just sits there and stares into the mirror all day, or Snow White's, mother or stepmother, whatever it is, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all, right? It's that. It's saying, yes, look at this idea. Look at this idea that came from me, right? Whereas the mind submissive to the divine would say, I'm grateful that I was blessed with having been the hollow reed through which this idea could be shared. And that's the protection that the ego fascination, fixation, right, is that it didn't really come from me, right? I had some role in it for sure. Again, or what I use that analogy.
You could talk about muses,
right.
Muses or artist inspiration. I don't want to lose any secular audience, right, that may come across this and think, the idea is that an artist inspiration, whether you're, divine. Actually, I should say the ancient Greeks used to describe divinity as just something different because they didn't have the context of an Abrahamic God. So, but divinity was there, arete was there, virtue ethics was there, the birthplace of the entire Western civilization was there. That's where it emerged from. I understand what the muses were. They understood what divinity was. And so how we shape that is a function of our abstract reasoning. And we could say that, but it's still too on one hand, you could say it's too reason-centric, but from a theological standpoint, reason is that unique God-given gift.
Yes.
Right? So this is what we have, my friend. This is our superpower. These are our wings.
Well, I think, and we'll end with this because part of me is getting a little bit of the heebie-jeebies now as I look at the time and I'm like, whatever this conversation is, which I'm very, very much enjoying, to imagine or to fantasize that this is of interest to anybody else to continue the live recording. I'll continue this with you offline, and I'm really looking forward to engaging with it. But I would leave it with this thought that is now actually escaping me as I digressed about and got out of the flow of the.
Let me help you. Okay, there's a free form association. Let's see if we can yank this one out of the abyss. Yeah. And so it's the absence of ego, but the presence of something angelic, divinity, the birthing process.
Well, the reasoning, human reasoning, and the God-given gift. Oh yes. So here's the thought. That is only for ourselves. The second hidden word in the Baha'i faith, which I'm just going to pull up and read it here, evokes this thought that I'm getting at, and then I'll share what the thought is. Hopefully, I'll still be able to retain it, even as I'm distracting myself by pulling up this reference. But the hidden words of Baha'u'llah are like the Proverbs on steroids, right? Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, but these are summations of the divine intelligence. O son of spirit, the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Turn not away thou therefrom if thou desirest me, and neglect it not, that I may confide in thee. So the pursuit of justice, that law that David, the Ark of the Covenant that David brought into Jerusalem and put up on the hill, the focus on true justice allows God to confide in us. Neglect it not, that I may confide in thee. By its aid thou shalt see with thine own eyes, and not through the eyes of others. The subtext of this show tonight was the independent investigation of the truth. We didn't dive deeply into that, perhaps on a future show with Allan. But by its aid thou shalt see with thine own eyes, and not through the eyes of others, and shalt know of thine own knowledge, and not through the knowledge of thy neighbor. Ponder this in thy heart, how it behooveth thee to be. Verily, justice is my gift to thee, and the sign of my loving kindness. Set it then before thine eyes. There's so much in this, but the thing I wanted to pull out was see it with your own eyes and not through the eyes of your neighbor. Whatever that gift is, whatever that spark that comes from divine reason, the intent isn't that I become the great revealer, the great light bringer that brings this wisdom to every other human being, right? The hardest thing for God to reveal to me is the truth about myself. Yeah. The hardest thing, the reason David's story is so powerful is that when Nathan said, "You are that man," he said, "You're right." So the ego is protected when we realize whatever this insight is, what am I doing about it? Or to quote another great prophet, Paul Simon, hey, breakdowns come and breakdowns go. What are you going to do about it? That's what I'd like to know. Right? What, and that's the non-self. What's in it for me, right? What's in it for me spiritually? What lesson do I have to derive to become a better person? We can be very selfish when it comes to how can I be a better human being? That's perhaps the application of the ego that doesn't leave us falling Icarus-like to earth or having us staring into the mirror contemplating our own beauty.
Well said.
And with that, dear friends, thank you so much. Oh, we have a really faithful participant here who's enjoying the conversation. So thank you, A.M. Sterling. And I do hope you're saying that not because you want to win another book. I'm sorry, that's evil, that's mean. We're so grateful that you're here with us and showing your support. With that, Dan, any last comments from you, or shall we say good night to everybody?
Good night, everybody.
See you next week. We're so late, we're just going to leave it a surprise.